Here we go again with this awful franchise, just finding ways to lose. The New York Giants are now 2-4, but there's actually a lot of good with this team. You know what the problem is? Daniel Jones. Plain and simple. There has never been a time in Daniel Jones' career where he was in a better position to succeed, and he's still way too inconsistent. He played phenomenal against the Seahawks, but followed that up with an absolute doozy against the Bengals, who went into this game with the second most points given up in the NFL this year. The modern NFL is a quarterback's league. Why have the Chiefs won 3 of the last 5 Super Bowls? They have the best quarterback. You are not winning a lot of games, let alone the Super Bowl, in the modern NFL with someone like Trent Dilfer, like the Ravens did in 2000. Daniel Jones just can't string together several good games in a row, even with the best offensive line he's ever had, and that tells me this team cannot progress with him as their starting quarterback. He played so well without Malik Neighbors in Seattle, by far the best receiver he's ever thrown to, so I don't want to hear the excuses of him not having him against the Bengals. He missed on so many deep balls, and he's been missing on a lot of those this year. He telegraphed passes to Darius Slayton, and the Bengals were able to jump on those. And worst of all, the closest the Giants were able to get to the end zone, outside of the one touchdown they did score, Daniel Jones threw the ball down the middle of the field to avoid a sack where there were 4 Bengals. This is not the first time I've ever seen him throw the ball away towards the middle of the field, and if you know anything about football, you should know if you're going to throw the ball away, throw it to the sidelines, not the middle of the field. Tyrone Tracy was open on that play, but Jones wasn't looking at him. The play was probably not drawn up for him, but Daniel Jones just never developed the ability to process things fast enough, and here we go again with it, resulting in a boneheaded play. You're a lot better off taking the sack or getting called for intentional grounding than throwing an interception down the middle of the field. I have been back and forth many times with how I feel about Daniel Jones. As long as he's a New York Giant, I want him to succeed. He's shown flashes for years, but he's just so inconsistent. Last year, when his backups outplayed him, was when I felt like I'm done with him. This year started out terrible. The loss against the Commanders only happened because the Giants didn't have a kicker, but that's still 3 out of 4 losses this year that Daniel Jones wasn't good enough. I still think drafting Malik Neighbors with the 6th overall pick instead of a quarterback was the right move, and I will die on that hill, but in his 7th year and still not having truly broken out, Daniel Jones just seems to be what he is, and that is not a franchise quarterback. Yes, the Giants are due for a new quarterback at this point, but I also want the right one, not just any quarterback. No matter what happens the rest of the season, there's one thing to be proud of. The Giants have the best offensive line we have seen in over a decade. Daniel Jones is only tied for the 15th most sacked quarterback in the league right now, and he walked into about half of those sacks against Minnesota in week 1. Last year, it took him 6 games to get sacked 30 times. This year, he's only been sacked 14 times in 6. Not only that, in the run game too, look at the holes this offensive line is generating. Even without seeing PFF, the eye test alone is enough to know this offensive line is actually not a bunch of dummies in front of the quarterback for once. As much as it sucks to have to accept that the Giants wasted the 7th overall pick by drafting Evan Neal 2 years ago, benching him sure was what needed to be done to help make this offensive line any good. Lastly, about this offensive line, as hard of a decision as it was to not pay Saquon Barkley, because he was the clear-cut best offensive player the Giants had for most of the last 6 years, now he's an enemy. If the Giants paid Saquon that money, they would not have been able to get Jermaine, Eluemunor, and John Runyan, who have both been important to improving this offensive line. Yes, Eluemunor is the one who got beat when Daniel Jones threw that interception, but no one's perfect, and Jones is still way more to blame for that, for making a boneheaded play, throwing the ball down the middle of the field just to get the ball away. Saquon behind this offensive line sure would have been a thrill to watch, but it's just not worth it in this day and age to pay a running back, especially when you don't have an offensive line. While I can say I told you the Giants won't regret paying Saquon, I certainly can't say I told you so about Tyrone Tracy emerging like he has. Of course, the team Saquon chose to play for is what makes me want to puke, and while I'll never root for him again, we've seen it for about a decade now that paying a running back a lot of money just hasn't been worth it in the modern NFL. Tracy has come out of nowhere to absolutely ball out against the Seahawks. He needs the ball in his hands a lot more. He had a decent game against the Bengals, but should have had more plays called for him when the passing game was so ineffective. He is so elusive. He is a threat as a receiver too, and to draft him in the 5th round, wow. Also, this is why I say no to tanking. The first few picks or even the 1st round is not where the draft ends. If you have good enough scouting, you can find gems like Tyrone, Tracy late in the draft. Now for the receivers, the Giants have not had a number 1 receiver for way too long, not since Odell Beckham Jr., and it's about damn time this team has one. Hopefully he can get healthy as soon as possible, but we know concussions are nothing to take lightly. What Malik Neighbors is capable of doing when he is on the field is exactly why I was saying all along, you're a whole lot better off drafting pieces around the quarterback rather than just throw a quarterback in a fire. As inconsistent as Daniel Jones may be, the next quarterback would not be in any better of a position to succeed without getting the right pieces around him, and even with Jones having his own faults, there is also some truth to him not being in a good position to succeed in previous years. I would rather not have to talk about drafting a new quarterback again 5 years from now because the next quarterback is also set up for failure. Now this team has the pieces to be able to use their first pick on a quarterback, assuming they don't get much better from here, and have a top draft pick, but they did not before building this offensive line or drafting Neighbors. As much as I want a new quarterback, I also want the right one, not just anyone. Want to know what the quarterbacks drafted after Neighbors are doing now? They're both backups. I know that doesn't mean they can't succeed later on in their careers. I know there are Hall of Fame quarterbacks that started out as backups. My point here is, yes, quarterback is the most important position, but who you build around the quarterback still matters a lot too. You cannot throw in a rookie quarterback no matter who it is and expect them to immediately turn the team around if you don't build around them. It's not good for them mentally to have to be thrown into fire right out of the gates. Also, while it may not be likely to draft a franchise quarterback late in the 1st round or after the 1st round, it's certainly not impossible. So yes, drafting Malik Neighbors being the right pick is a hill I'm dying on. For the rest of the receiving core, yes, it sucks to not have a number 1 receiver for the time being because of Malik Neighbors' concussion. If the Bengals were to lose Jamar Chase, they'd still have T. Higgins. The Giants may not have that kind of depth at wide receiver. I get all that. Still, that kind of offensive performance against the team that's given up the 2nd most points in the league going into this game is inexcusable, and it starts with quarterback play. Daniel Jones played phenomenal without Malik Neighbors in Seattle, so there's no reason for him to be that bad against the Bengals. He cannot be telegraphing his passes like he did to Darius Slayton. The interception he threw, that's just simply low IQ football. An NFL quarterback should know not to throw the ball down the middle of the field to avoid a sack. Just taking the sack or getting called for intentional grounding would be a lot better than an interception like that. The defense is definitely a strong point, as this team is leading the league in sacks right now, and the only player in the league with more sacks than Sexy Dexy. The best defensive tackle in the league is Aiden Hutchinson, who unfortunately broke his leg, and I wish him a speedy recovery. We've also been waiting longer than we would have liked for Brian Burns to show up after paying him $141 million for the next 5 years, but he made a big play against the Seahawks, sacking Geno Smith on 4th and 1 early in the 4th quarter to allow the Giants to kick a field goal and extend the lead to 10. Wow, Greg Joseph actually made that field goal. Why couldn't he do it against the Bengals? Obviously, Kayvon Thibodeaux having wrist surgery is an unfortunate loss for the Giants, but both Burns and Azeez Ojulari stepped up big in Kayvon's absence. Ojulari has shown flashes of becoming a great edge rusher, but hasn't been able to put it all together because he struggled to stay on the field. Hopefully he can stay healthy for as long as Kayvon is sidelined. Deonte Banks got off to a bad start this year as he was asked to guard the other team's best receiver and was getting burned. That wasn't the case at all against the Seahawks as he locked up DK Metcalf. Let's see if he can play like that consistently, and if he does, his play with the defensive line being as great as they have been, this defense can only get better. Week 6, this loss was not at all on the defense. Daniel Jones and the offense let them down. The defense only gave up 2 touchdowns and a field goal to one of the best offenses in the league. Joe Burrow went into this game leading the league in touchdown passes, and Jamar Chase went into this game leading the league in touchdown catches. They gave up 0 touchdown passes. Chase Brown's rushing touchdown at the end happened when the game was pretty much over anyways. Now for Brian Daboll, I absolutely still think he's the right head coach. He's not perfect by any means, but no one is, and I think the Giants still want to run through a wall for him. The first year with Daboll, we all loved him. Last year when the team started out 2-8, plenty of us didn't love him nearly as much. When the team won their next 3 games after that, it told me he's still someone the Giants want to run through a wall for. The game against the Seahawks was their best game yet, and it really showed that the Giants are continuing to fight for Brian Daboll. In the game against the Cowboys, Daboll called a good game as they were driving the ball down the field, but they just couldn't finish those drives. He sure called an amazing game against the Seahawks, and the Giants really outplayed the Seahawks in a way that you wouldn't know just from looking at the score. The first drive of the game should have been a touchdown, only for Eric Gray to fumble at the goal line and the Seahawks returned it for a touchdown. If the Giants scored there, they would not have needed Isaiah Simmons to block the field goal to win the game. The Giants had way more time of possession, played a more disciplined game, did better on third down, and had almost 100 more yards than the Seahawks did. The loss against the Bengals, it's definitely more on Daniel Jones than anyone else. Greg Joseph too for missing 2 field goals. You can say Daboll should have ran the ball more because that worked so well against the Seahawks, and the pass game was very ineffective against the Bengals, but you can't blame him for Greg Joseph being as inaccurate as Brucey from the longest yard, missing those 2 field goals. Daniel Jones still locked in on Darius Slayton way too much, and the defense was jumping all over it. His deep ball has not been accurate, and you can't blame Daboll for that. You certainly can't blame Daboll for Jones throwing low IQ interceptions like he did early in this game. The Giants were also 3 for 5 on 4th down conversions, which Daboll absolutely should get credit for. Before I talk about the upcoming schedule, I want to acknowledge something that I think we should 100% applaud Daboll for. He doesn't care that Evan Neal was the 7th overall pick. Joe Judge probably would have kept Neal in the starting lineup no matter how bad he was. This is a thing that I've loved about Daboll since the very beginning of his stint as the Giants head coach. He doesn't care how much you're getting paid, like he showed when he benched Kenny Galladay, and he doesn't care where you were drafted. You have to earn your playing time with what you do now on the field, not what you did with another team or what you did in college. Next up, the Giants have the Eagles. The Eagles have owned the Giants for a while, but it's not like the Eagles have been on fire this year, and they only beat the Browns on Sunday by 4 points. Then the Giants play the Steelers, who have a great defense but no offense whatsoever. What worries me more than anything about that one isn't even the matchup itself. It's a primetime game, and Daniel Jones is 1-15 in those games for his career. Then the Commanders at home, who the Giants only didn't beat in week 2 because they didn't have a damn kicker. Then the Panthers, who are a joke before the bye week. All the games after the bye week are winnable too, and thankfully the game against the Steelers is the last primetime game of the year. Primetime or not though, if Daniel Jones can't get consistent, it may just be another lost season, even with all the right pieces around him. The week 1 loss to the Vikings, where Jones had his worst game of the year, was not primetime, so yes, primetime games are where Daniel Jones is at his worst for his whole career. This season, his worst game was not a primetime game, so there is plenty of reason to worry that he can't be consistent going forward, even with the pieces he has now. Everything seemed to be lining up for the Giants to actually have a good season after the win in Seattle, but knowing this team has just mastered the art of letting us down, we had to be careful with how optimistic we can actually be. Just one thing I'd like to ask of this team, even if this team truly is bound for another losing season, let's please at least not have any of those out of the ordinary off the field injuries, because the Giants seem to have more of those than most teams, like Plaxico when he accidentally shot himself in the leg, JPP blowing up his hand in a 4th of July accident, and Xavier McKinney's dirt biking accident 2 years ago during the bye week. Please, none of that this year, okay? Please. Do you think I'm being too harsh on Daniel Jones, or do you agree that he's holding the team back? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, a like would be much appreciated. If you could please consider subscribing and turning on notifications, your support is much appreciated. Welcome to the team. If you're already subscribed, thank you for your support as always. Links to my social media are down below for my more immediate reactions to what's going on in the sports world. If you'd like to see my most recent video or the one that YouTube recommends, both are up above. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Go Giants. Hopefully Daniel Jones has a great rest of the year and happens to prove me wrong.